learning. Learning. The second necessary tool for leadership is the tool of learning. Every leader must be a learner, because for leadership to grow, the leader should grow. Alvin Toffler said that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. It means there are probably things we know today that we will unlearn later, and there are other things we'll relearn. So it's important we undergo that continual change of learning, unlearning things and relearning. For example, back in school, I remember, I think somewhere in JHS, we were taught that the square root of a negative number was not possible. And at that level, that was true. We got to, I think, was it SHS, we learned about complex numbers. I went further, read mechanical engineering. I got to know more in mathematics. And I came to realize that the square root of a negative number is possible. So to the student in JHS who has not been taught complex numbers, the person is told that the square root of a negative number is not possible. That is what the person has learned at that level. But you go further, they teach you complex numbers and they let you know that it's actually possible. But the knowledge you had at JHS was not sufficient to produce the square root of a negative number. Because as we went further, in complex numbers, we learned that there were imaginary numbers. So that's why Alvin Toffler said the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So using the scenario I just gave, imagine I'm a leader who symbolically I'm still at the JHS level. There are many things I will not have access to. There are many things I will not know, and it will affect my leadership. Only to later realize that there is more to know that I did not know, but I was holding on to old knowledge. So we must learn, in the course of time, unlearn and relearn. And that is why learning is very important when it comes to leadership. In looking at learning, let me just give us two routes where or through which we can get that learning. And we did some of this when we're looking at building capacity for leadership. The first is mentorship. In looking at building capacity last year, we took some time to go through mentorship. But I just want to mention it briefly. Mentorship is one of the ways we get to learn. When you get to serve under somebody who is a senior in a particular field or capacity. In that field you've chosen, you have a mentor where the person has certain experiences you don't have. In the Bible, we see in Job 12:12, we are told that with the ancient is wisdom, and in length of days understanding. So the older people have wisdom and understanding. And many of the times they have experiences that are a rich resource or a storehouse of resources for we, the younger generation. So when you have a mentor in a particular field, the mentor has some knowledge that you need. And as you interact with that mentor, what is going to happen is that you are going to learn beyond what you previously knew. Then, Reverend Samadini said that nobody succeeds all alone. And that is why you need a mentor. You need someone above you to guide you. Someone who has been to where you are going to, or someone who is currently where you are yet to get to. Because amazingly, there are times that when you've not entered a particular place, there is a view or a perception you have. Now, when you get to that place, you get to see that, oh, things are not as I thought. The way things look from the outside is different from the way things are actually on the inside. So imagine having the experience of someone now entering, and you are being guided by someone who is within. You have a balanced view. You have a fuller, broader picture of that whole place you are entering. And that is why mentorship is important, because nobody succeeds all alone. Then in addition to mentorship, we have exposure. Exposure. Last year, when we were looking at building capacity for leadership, is one of the capacity building tools we looked at. But then I want to go over again, because exposure is very relevant when it comes to learning. The more exposed the person is, the more the person learns. And also, we want to know how exposure comes. We did that last year. We are going over again. We said exposure comes through physical presence. physical presence. And in physical presence, it has to do with you going to a place physically. And what it does is that it helps in capturing information through the basic human senses. So you're a leader and you get exposed to another environment. Let's say you are the leader of a company, a corporation. You get exposed to a bigger corporation. You get to see what they do, hear what they say, and just have a feel of the environment. It's really going to help and aid in your leadership. You are going to see things that will challenge you. You are going to hear things that will challenge you. So physical presence is how exposure comes. Second, reading of materials. Reading of materials. In addition to going physically to a place, there are times you may not have full access to a place physically. But then the experiences people have, they've documented in books, in journals, and in materials that you can read and have access to what they know. And that is why Mark Twain said that the man who does not read has no advantage over the man who cannot read. The man who does not read has no advantage over the man who cannot read. So if I can't read, I'll definitely not read because I can't. But if you can and you are not reading, you also don't know what I don't know. So you have no advantage over me. Then, in addition to reading materials, we have attending conferences and seminars. Attending conferences and seminars is one of the ways that we get exposed. You get to meet people who are seniors in those conferences, and sometimes strategic relationships are developed in those conferences and seminars, and all those facilitate exposure. And then number 4, watching videos and listening to audios, leadership videos, leadership audios. You are starting an institution, or your institution is at a very low level. You started like 2 or 3 years ago, but somebody has been in that field for, let's say, 40 years, 15 years, and they have videos online. You can just go and watch or listen to what they are sharing, and all those things are going to facilitate your learning. Then we also look at effects of exposure. If I get exposed through physical presence, reading of materials, attending conferences and seminars, and watching videos and listening to audios, what does exposure produce? How do I learn through exposure? 1, exposure affects perception. Exposure affects perception. Last week, when we were looking at tools for handling difficulties and challenges, perception was the first thing we spoke about, and we spoke about focus and apathy. And one thing exposure does is it affects your perception. You get to think differently. You see things differently. And that is why sometimes as a leader, when you get exposed to bigger environments, the way you think changes. You now suddenly start thinking out of the box, because maybe you've just been used to your own environment, nothing new. But when you get exposed and you see new things, you get to see new possibilities. So exposure causes you to see things differently. It affects perception. And then one other thing exposure does is that it creates and causes motivation. The more exposed the person is, the more motivated he gets. And you remember in the past couple of weeks, we've mentioned that leadership has to do with inspiration. And we mentioned that the leader must be inspired for him to be able to inspire others. The leader must be motivated for him or her to be able to motivate others. So one thing exposure does is that it causes you to be motivated. You get to see new possibilities. You get into an environment that is bigger than your environment. You're like, wow, we can get here. We can do this. Especially when you hear the stories of those ahead, and you get to see that they were even worse than you when they were at your stage. It causes you to see greater possibilities. So exposure causes and creates motivation. One other effect exposure has on us is that it expands our mental capacity. It expands our mental capacity. Your mind is stretched when you are exposed. Your mind is very stretched. Maybe you are pastoring a ministry of 500 people. You get into a conference of this church that has 20,000 members. You enter the place. The place is so big. And the leaders of that place are more than your whole congregation. It stretches your mind. You now get to see the way things are done. Oh, I see. Your mind is just straight. Maybe you thought pastoring 500 members was the biggest thing in the world. To meet someone pastoring 20,000 people, and the person is pastoring stress-free. You're running a company, you have 20 members in your staff, part of your staff. You get to a company, the person has 1,500 staff members, and the person is still relaxed. The person is able to rest. It stretches your mind, and you ask yourself questions. What is he or her doing? What is he or she doing that I'm not doing? What is this person doing that I'm not doing? What it does is it stretches your mind. And that is why exposure is important. Number 4, exposure creates room for new ideas. New ideas. When you get exposed, what happens is new ideas just rush into your mind. You're like, oh, we can do this. Oh, we can do that. Things you had never thought about will just come into your mind. It never occurred to you that this would happen or this could happen. But all of a sudden, you start seeing the possibilities of new ideas. Things you had never thought of come for you to implement in your own leadership endeavor. And then number 5, effect of exposure. Exposure gives you access to feedback. We go back to that word again, feedback. How does exposure give us access to feedback? It's simple. You get to know what you are doing right or doing wrong. When you get exposed, you get to know what you are doing right or doing wrong, just by being exposed to a new environment. Because sometimes when the people you are exposed to are communicating, they may mention that, oh, some time back in my leadership, I was doing this. And I realized that, no, this will actually not work. And I changed. Now, that may actually be what you are currently doing. So upon hearing it, it becomes feedback to you. Oh, I thought this will work, but this person said he or she has tried it and it's not working. And the person tried it for a long time and the person suddenly changed. So I don't have to go through that process of trying it for 10 years for me to now realize it won't work. In my first year, I have known that it won't work. Let me just switch to what the person is doing. That is helping the person. So exposure gives you access to feedback. You get to know what you are doing right and what you are doing wrong. What you are doing right, because sometimes in listening to people who are ahead or in getting exposed, you get to realize that people are applying something you're already applying and it's working. It encourages you to be consistent with what you're applying. Because sometimes when you sow, if it's not an annual plant, what will happen is it may take long. Perennial grains or plants take a long time. So you may not be seeing fruits, but by hearing someone applying the same thing, someone who is far ahead, and the person yielding results, it encourages you to continue. That becomes positive feedback to what you are doing. So exposure, in addition to mentorship, are 2 ways we get to learn in leadership.